Welcome back to She Can, where role models lead by example by telling their stories. We have well over 500 women, and we started interviewing men who are allies to women who help fill the gaps and build the bridges and make a difference. And today I'm talking to someone that I'm so excited to have on She Can, Robert Baker. Welcome to She Can. You're an allyship specialist, a speaker, a D&I leader, the vice chair of European Women on Boards, a trustee of UN Women UK, and the founder of Potential Talent Consulting. You advise companies and coach leaders on developing their capabilities to build inclusive workplaces and optimize and unlock the potential of their talent. You're a global thought leader on how to engage men as allies in gender equality and inclusion. You're passionate about being an advocate for D&I and have over 40 years experience, Robert, which is so exciting. You speak about men as allies, inclusive leadership, the power of sponsorship mentoring and reverse mentoring, unconscious bias, and building mature masculinity. And you've been doing it for the longest time. Robert, tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Wow. Thanks, Stephanie. And it's always fascinating to hear those introductions that of oneself because you think, oh my gosh, I've really done all of that. But I definitely have. So where did I get started? Well, actually, I think actually it goes back to my university days when I'd come from what in the UK we would call a kind of working class background. And so my parents were, my dad was a carpet fitter. My parents were relatively not well off, as it were. And when I went to university, I got a full support financial package from the local government, as it were, to help fund my university education. When I got to university, I realized that I was kind of in a minority, that most of the people at university had parents of professional backgrounds and were sort of generally coming from a kind of wealthier, more professional background than I was. So I kind of felt a little bit like the odd one out, I suppose. And that was an interesting thing to get my head around. Now, while I was at university, I met some really amazing women who were incredibly smart, incredibly capable. We had great discussions, etc. When I got into the workplace, went to the consulting field. I realized that there weren't as many women, and there certainly weren't as many women at the top in these organizations. And I think a lot of that was to do with the amount of hours that the job demanded, that kind of complete focus on what you could bill your clients, all the kind of stuff that men would typically boast about. And it wasn't an environment I think that was at that time as attractive to women. And so I remember thinking at one point, this is a very male dominated, very alpha male dominated environment.
Yeah.
I missed the kind of dialogue that I had with women when I was at university, etc. So anyway, a few years later, when we were setting up a women's network at Mercer, I remember saying to the woman who was setting it up, um, don't you want men to support this? How can men support you in what you're doing? And so we had a discussion about how to set up a women's network so that men would support it. And the first thing we really did was change the name from the Women's Network to a gender neutral name. We called it the Vine, which meant that people didn't really know it was about gender equality or necessarily about women or men. But we persuaded, in a sense, men to come to Vine events. And that was a great way of kind of gender neutralizing, if you like, and creating an environment where men could relate to topics being discussed. As a result of that experience, and because Mercer was involved with a women's network called PWN, Professional Women's Network Global, I got invited to be on the board of PWN Global as their first engaging men vice president, their first man on the board. And my journey, if you like, started from there, from one woman's network to another, as you said, to the board of European Women on Boards today, to the board of UN Women UK, and a variety of other women's networks where I'm involved. So that's been, in a sense, my journey. But also at the same time, I left Mercer, started up my own consulting firm, very interested in the whole topic of diversity, gender equality. And I'm working now with companies in that whole space of how to get their men more engaged in this topic of gender equality and inclusion. And of course, there's never been a more important time to be having those conversations.
Exactly. Robert, I love that you say it literally came from one question. How can I help? I think this is a an important question to ask that not many others asked. And you asked it decades ago when it was very different times. You spoke about the current times and the backlash that we see against DE and I. How do you reframe your role, and how do you see a vision forward?
Right. Well, that's obviously critical right now. I think one of the things that we are all recognizing is that in the discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we focused a lot on the groups that were underrepresented and marginalized and disadvantaged. And we didn't always think about, well, how do we make sure that we include the group that actually is, probably the most privileged, the most advantaged, the most dominant in the culture,
Yeah.
i.e., typically white men. And I think because there was a focus on wanting to do things to remove barriers and create more opportunities for groups that were underrepresented in leadership and throughout the organization, um, the men felt a little bit excluded. The men felt that there wasn't a focus on them. And of course, crucially, the men feared change. What they feared was that there would be more now focus on others, and it would lead to disadvantage for them in terms of future career opportunities. So there was lots of burbling, if you like, pushback coming through. And this was some years ago, before even we had people like Andrew Tate, before we had the things that are going on in the US right now. So there'd always been that kind of grumbling, if you like, from men about, well, why the focus on women, or why the focus on others? What about us? And so I think what we've recognized now is that if we want to create inclusive cultures, truly inclusive cultures, we've got to include everybody, which means
Yeah.
we've got to listen to the voice of men. And of course, there are some men, many men, who've had a lot of privilege from being men. I mean, the world of work has been a man's world for sure, and the culture's been one that's been very male dominated. But the success hasn't been there for all men. Some groups of men have been struggling, and I think we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize this fear of change, and we need
Mm.
to explain that, look, actually, a focus on gender equality and inclusion is good for everybody. It's good for women, it's good for men, and it's good for all of us. And a key part of what I do is explaining to men how they can benefit actually from being more involved as allies and inclusive leaders. Because I've seen that myself. I've seen the real benefits for me in my leadership and in my impact, as it were. And I think other men can have that too. And I was very involved in putting a survey together a couple of years ago, and we just repeated it, which shows that men who are engaging in this field feel real benefits of being better leaders, and actually they feel better about themselves as human beings too. So there's huge benefits for men. So I think it's about reframing it to say we're including men in this discussion, and there are benefits for them too in being part of it.
Yeah. So what are those benefits, Robert? What are the benefits? What are the learnings that you have of working with diverse groups over the last 40 years, of how it improves the lives of everybody, of the company as a whole? And of course, there's also a business case. We now know that diverse teams will have a better bottom line.
Absolutely. And of course, that business case is incredibly important. And a lot of companies and a lot of CEOs talk about the business case. Um, uh, so I think we recognize that it's good for, as you said, for team performance, it's good for innovation, it's good for new ideas. And what we know is that if we have an environment where we're having increasingly diversified employee bases, so for example, I'm working with one client with 65 nationalities in their employee base.
Mm.
Uh, so that's a more diverse employee base maybe than in the past. Um, you need leaders that know how to manage in that environment. You need leaders with emotional and cultural intelligence that know how to navigate that. So one of the things that I talk about in terms of benefits to men from engaging in this work is learning how to be better leaders, and how to be better leaders in an environment where we need leaders that know how to navigate the world of inclusion, the world of diversity. And that's some of the benefits that the men I mentioned in this survey report. They report that they've learned how to connect better with others. They've reported now they're trusted more by others in their workforce. So those are real benefits for a leader. And so it's kind of focusing on those things. And for example, also the men leaders that have been involved in this space talk about being able to be more authentic about themselves as leaders. They can be more open about the fact that they've got parenting responsibilities. They can be more open about their vulnerability. They can be more open about themselves as humans. And I think that's an enormously important factor as a leader these days. It's good for you personally to be more open and transparent, but it's good for those that work around you because they can benefit from that and they can learn from that and they can be more open and transparent too. So I think there are multiple benefits there which we want to continue to bring out for men to be allies and inclusive leaders.
Robert, and I think that those benefits, once a leader learns to be more authentic and more vulnerable, also other men trust them more. I always think we forget about that. It's not just concentrating on being more diverse and accommodating more women and but it's also that other men, and especially the younger generations of men coming in, will have more resonance with that. So I always think, if I look at the generations of my children that are in their late teens and early 20s, they go out into a world and they don't want to see the world as it is right now. And they don't want to see this backlash. And they feel more comfortable of being more open and of being that kind of man that we need in order to fill the gaps and build the bridges and make those differences so we can see a more inclusive world going forward. Robert, so I'm wondering, how does one train people? I mean, I understand you go and you talk to the leaders and that is a trickle down effect. What do you feel were the sort of most successful ways of going about?
Well, I think one of the key things we have to do is enhance people's awareness and
Mm,
men's awareness of a number of different things. We need to, first of all, enhance their awareness of the fact that actually, as men, they're pretty privileged, and there's lots of benefits, if you like, that we enjoy that others don't necessarily enjoy. We're seen as natural leaders. We're seen as having more authority in the workplace, for example, which isn't based on any real fact, but it's just an
mm,
impression that people have. Um,
yeah.
so we need men to understand that they have certain advantages starting out. The second thing is they need to be more aware of the experiences of others. So one of the things I talk about to a lot of the men that I work with is, are you aware of what women's experiences are in the workplace, or the experiences of people with disabilities, or whatever it is?
Mm,
Are you just aware of the experiences of others that are different to you? Because they will be having experiences that you're not having. And to be a leader is to be someone who's empathetic to their experiences and knows how to remove any barriers that they might face. Because if you want to create an environment which is one where all talent can thrive, you've got to remove the barriers for some of those groups that have those challenges. And as a leader, you can be more aware of that and learn how to do it. So the starting point really is almost awareness of those. And then, of course, it's also being aware of our own biases.
mm,
So another big aha moment for many men at the start of these kind of workshops, as it were, is that there's a greater awareness of, wow, we do have these stereotypes in our head that we're socialized with. We do have biases about certain things about women and about certain things about men. And those biases hold us back and they hold everybody back. So we need to do work on overcoming those. And that's really the sort of foundational starting point, really,
mm,
I think, for them building on the skills that they need to develop. And as you said, um, you know, younger people coming into the workplace want a different kind of leader. They want a leader that's empathetic. They want a leader that has emotional intelligence. And if you're working in a very diverse environment, you need leaders with cultural intelligence too. Um, but what we also need is leaders that can speak, men leaders that can speak to other men. And I think this is the critical thing that we're starting to see now, that if we can have open conversations amongst men about what this is all about, how they can show up as allies, we can break down some of these barriers, get men talking about their fears of getting it wrong, of being called out, of being cancelled, whatever it is they've got fears of. Um, and that conversation between men, enlightened male leaders that share their experiences with other men and encourage them to come forward, that's where the real work really happens and helps men develop to become allies.
Yeah. Robert, and you talk a lot about this mature masculinity, and we see a lot of the opposite in the world again now, where we have male leaders that are representing the sort of bully culture, and I'm very depressed about that, because I think we have done so much good work with diversity and inclusion, and it's almost as if we were coming into a phase where we were reaping the benefits, right? We saw change happen. And now
Yeah,
with this backlash, that who knows, that's definitely derailing us in some sort of a way of reaping more benefits. So
yeah.
how can we build this more mature masculinity? What is your vision?
Well, I think first of all, we've got to recognize the real challenges that exist right now. There's no doubt that with the rise of things like social media, young men and boys are subject to influences which maybe they wouldn't have had access to in past decades, etc.
Mm,
It's meant, I think, also the fact that there's probably been less opportunity for some of these younger boys and men to really relate to better role models has meant that they've been open to messages that come through around how they should be thinking and acting these days, especially towards women. So I think we need to recognize that that is a real challenge. So
and that we
how do
have a problem, right? I
yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And of course, if you've watched Adolescence, which I'm sure a
Mm,
lot of people have, and a
yeah.
lot of people listening to this will have done, you'll know now there's a real worry that parents have about, do we know what our young boys and girls are getting up to when they're on their
Mm,
computers?
mm,
When they're on their own, are we aware of what they're accessing? Because there's a lot of really harmful material out there,
yeah.
um, and so we need to be aware of that. But how do we build a better message and a better vision, if you like, for young boys and men? I think, one of the things is to really think about ultimately what is truly going to make any of us happy and successful. It isn't necessarily pursuing the kind of fast cars, lots of money kind of dream. That actually, what truly makes us happy, and we know this from the science and the research, is being actually, kind and generous to others. It's being thoughtful about others. It's actually helping others. Those are the kind of things, and building relationships with others. Those are the things that really going to help us be happier longer term. And I think to find role models and men role models that fulfill that kind of image are really what we're looking for. So, for example, in the sporting world, we might look for sporting figures that more easily convey that kind of image, whether that's someone like in the UK, we've had Marcus Rashford.
Yeah.
In the US, we've had someone called Caleb Williams, and there are others. But also, in the broader sort of cultural world, men like Harry Styles, for example, who aren't,
Mm,
afraid to wear something a bit more floral or to be a bit more flamboyant. But it's just about opening up to the fact that actually there are other role models that these young boys and men can get access to, and we get messages across that it seems fine at first to talk about being more resilient and more self-reliant, but some of the messages from these influencers then flip over into ways to treat women, and that's
mm.
where they're ultimately not going to be successful. If we want our young boys and men to have successful relationships with women, they need to understand that those come from being respectful, not from trying to be dominant. And I think that's a message we really need to get through at a pretty early age.
Yeah. Robert, I always feel it's an economic necessity to be more inclusive and diverse, but I think it's almost a political mission now, because we have a mental health issue with
Yeah.
young men. We have, I read somewhere Morgan Stanley did a study that by 2030, 45% of women in the US between the ages of 22 and 45 are going to be single because they
Hmm.
don't want to pair up. They
Hmm.
don't want to live in those type of relationships that they've seen and that they've seen role modeled, and they don't want that anymore. So
Yeah.
I feel if we don't want to face a sort of societal breakdown, which those indicators point to that direction, we have to really amplify the work that you've been doing for 40 years. So tell us a little bit more about what your vision is there. You know,
Yeah.
how can we all lead? Men and women need to lead by example. And that's almost, I think, that's definitely a societal issue and we need to face it, but it's something that we need to include in our politics and in the kind of laws and structures that we continue innovating and putting out into the world.
Well, Stephanie, you're absolutely right. It's a political as well as a social imperative to do this kind of work because what we're seeing around Europe and in the US now is the political consequences of social movements that are more aggressive, if you like, and you know this focus on populist, as it were, versions of events, which really are not kind and are not generous and are not helpful to anybody. I think what we've got to recognize is that the stereotypes that we grew up with, you know, what I call the man box for men, for example, which is this box about, you know, being strong, being tough, don't show any weakness, don't cry. That brought with it a lot of issues around things like mental health, as you
Mm.
make the point. I mean, the statistics on men's mental health are quite alarming, especially mental health for younger men. And so we know now that there are real negative consequences for men from being placed in this man box and staying in the man box because they're trying to attain a goal, if you like, which is almost for many of them unreachable. And of course, what in the process of trying to do that, they've made themselves very unattractive to women as potential partners. So I think one of the things we've got to do is get the message across, as I said earlier, about if you want to build relationships with women, you need to be more respectful. You need to be, you know, kind of more egalitarian in your approach. And I think there is a real risk right now, as you said, that women will look at men who probably haven't, you know, the men haven't been doing quite the same amount of work on their emotional intelligence. And the women will be looking at the men and saying, well, do I want to really date or marry someone who hasn't done that work on themselves and isn't as developed? So I think that's a kind of a real issue. So in all the work that I'm doing, I'm trying to, uh, in a sense, point out that there is a better way. There's a better version of masculinity that men can aspire to. That'll be good for them. It'll be good for women. It'll be good for everyone. Um, and it'll also be good for society because the values that we're talking about here, ones of generosity towards others, values of empathy, you know, those kind of things are going to help us build a better society. But we've got to recognize that right now, the direction of travel is going backwards, and we've got to wake up to that, I think, and we've got to sort of try and push it in the other direction. I think we will over time. I'm optimistic that over time we will move into a better climate, as it were, for equality. But right now, there are real dangers. A lot of people don't feel they're benefiting from what's going on in the world. And until we try and help them feel a bit better about how they're benefiting from it, I think some of these voices that are pushing us backwards will continue to prevail. So a lot of work to be done, and we've got to make our voices louder in terms of building inclusion and building happiness and really valuing human characteristics in our society.
Robert, and I always feel, you know, they have this Project 2025 in the US, which is obviously a sort of manifesto for the ruling party. And I always feel like, can we not, as a sort of global village, write up a manifesto of why this is so important and someone leading with that vision? And you said we have to speak up more, we have to be louder, we have to make sure that everybody understands the benefits of having an inclusive world, and that shows in our society, in our companies, in our families, in all our social structures, in all the spaces that we inhabit. So I'm wondering how can we all become more aware of this unconscious bias that ultimately all of us hold.
Yes, yes. Well, I think we probably need a Project 2030, which
Yeah.
basically focuses on the world that we want to build. I mean, so what we know about Project 2025 and projects like that is they're very politically orientated.
Mm,
They're trying to create an even wider gap between the haves and the have-nots. Okay,
yeah.
and I think what we want to create is a world where there is more opportunity for all of us, and that we can thrive. And it's a world where we're kinder to each other as well. And I think if we can put that out there in terms of a manifesto for something like Project 2030, as I call it, then I think actually we can get people buying into that. The question, of course, is how we operationalize it.
Mm.
What we need is politicians to buy into that, and we need people to vote for politicians that buy into that. So we've got to create a whole movement, and to get us focusing on the things that bring us together rather than the things that divide us. And of course, what we know is that some of the key issues on around things like Project 2025 are things like, immigration. So how do we feel about migrants? It's about economic inequality. How do we feel about that? How do we build a world where there's more chance for everybody to win rather than just, small groups that want to hold on to power and increase that power? I think so. So this is about a vision of the world we want to build. And I'd like to think there are many, many, many of us out there that want to build a kinder, fairer world. So let's put that manifesto together, and then let's get people behind it, and then let's get politicians behind it, because I think ultimately that's what it's going to take to help move us in the right direction.
Definitely. Robert, I'm wondering from your experience, do you have any examples of companies that have integrated measures really well where a diverse workforce is possible? It's not just about changing the minds and hearts of people. It's also about putting frameworks in place where everybody can thrive.
Yeah, yeah,
So this is to do about, flexibility and workplace flexibility and childcare. And, there is a lot of issues that we see for women to succeed in workplaces. What do you feel in your experience? It's not that you have to name names, but I'm wondering if you have a good example of where that worked really well.
yes, no, no. I do have an example, and actually, I've quoted them publicly. So, and they've quoted themselves publicly, so they won't mind me saying it. But I'm doing quite a bit of work through Jump, the gender equality consulting firm, where I'm an associate with a company called Engie, which is a French global energy company, and they have a female CEO, which is remarkable because
Mm.
only 7% of CEOs in Europe are women. Anyway, Engie is trying to transition to a green energy kind of company from being a traditional, more focused on traditional energy sources, as it were. So it's needed to come up with, new innovations, new approaches, etc. And Catherine McGregor, who's the CEO, is on public record as saying we can only have these new ideas and we can only move to this new business model, as it were, if we have all the talents in our company. So that means we've got to think about how we get access to more, for example, women, because what they found is, as an organization, it was an engineering kind of company, and a scientific company, very much based around a culture that would have been mostly male dominated. Okay,
Yeah.
as they moved forward, they realized they needed more gender balanced environment and a gender balance, particularly in the leadership. So they introduced targets for gender balance in their company, and then they put in place programs to help the women develop leadership capabilities to become leaders. So it had a women's development program, but they also had a program for the men to help the men understand why they were doing this program for women and the role that men could play in supporting the women and how the men could benefit from becoming inclusive leaders and gender balanced leaders. So that was actually quite a kind of forward thinking approach to it. And what they realized was it was going to take time. It wasn't going to be done in 3 months. So I think they're in year 5 of that program right now. It's taken them a lot of time, a lot of effort. It's cost obviously a lot of money to run these programs. But it's been a program that has yielded benefits for them. I think many of the women now at NG would say it's a better place for women to work at than many other companies in the sector. And I think they've been seeing, sort of better retention and attraction. So this is tough work. It is hard work. It takes time. You've really got to engage everybody. But I am seeing some signs. There are other examples of other companies focusing on this too. But NG is kind of one of those companies that sticks out in my mind for the amount of time they've been at it, the amount of effort they put into it, and the results that they're seeing from it.
Robert, and I'm wondering, you talk a lot about mentoring and reverse mentoring. And I always think if we want to see real change, we have to engage with the education sector. So we have to
Yeah.
have programs in schools and universities. All of the data that we see that underpins your efforts and our efforts and the people who try and have an impact here, there are such clear data points. I mean, I always think, how in the world are we even still talking about it? It's so obvious what the benefits are. Um, how can mentoring and reverse mentoring be supportive here?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it is important to get into schools and influence the career choices of girls and young women, and get into universities too, I suppose, from that point of view. We really want to open up to, there are fields that they could get into that where we need more women, and actually it will be a very attractive career opportunity for them. So getting women into STEM type
Yeah,
topics, for example, is
yeah,
absolutely critical. I think getting into schools at an earlier stage and explaining the benefits of STEM careers is incredibly important. That's sort of some of the things I've done in the past. When it comes into the workplace, I think reverse mentoring and mentoring can be really, really helpful, because what we can then see, and if it's reverse mentoring done on age, for example, and gender, we can see older men learning from younger women about what they need in the workplace, what their experiences are in the workplace, and the younger women can help sort of educate, as it were, the older men about ways they can look at the workplace, the things that they're doing personally to help bring about a more equitable workplace. So I think reverse mentoring really does have huge benefits. I'm personally, reverse mentored by a couple of women, one of whom is only 23, and it's really fascinating to hear her take on the work that I'm doing, the ideas that she brings into our mentoring sessions, and I learn from those. And I think we all need to do that. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to use mentoring, reverse mentoring, and of course, then ultimately for sponsorship programs,
mm,
where we've got male leaders actively sponsoring high potential female talent. Those are the ways we're going to make changes and bring in more women into the workplace and into positions of leadership.
yeah. Robert, thank you for all that incredible insight. What do you feel success will look like for you, Robert? You've been in this forever. What does success mean for you? And in some way, what legacy would you like to leave?
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I think success for me is about having impact. It's about changing the minds of individuals. It's changing the culture in companies
Mm,
to become more inclusive. So we want more men as allies. We want more companies to be having inclusive cultures where everybody can thrive. And so for me, that's kind of what success looks like. So it's having more opportunities to do that on a wider scale. I'm a huge collaborator, so I'm already working with a whole number of different organizations to help get my message out there to a wider audience
yeah.
and to work with them on that kind of thing. And then I guess in terms of legacy, uh, yeah, the one thing I can see is when I started out on this journey 15, 20 years ago, there weren't many men doing this work. Okay, I was one of the
Mm,
few. I'm really heartened by the fact now we have a lot more men doing this work, and they're taking the torch on, as it were, and carrying it forward. So people like Elliot Ray, for example, in the UK, who are running the Parenting Out Loud program, he's trying to get men talking now more openly about their parenting
mm,
responsibilities. He's trying to get companies to take their need to respect the parenting responsibilities of the men in their organization, let alone the women in their organization. Um, we've got men taking those kind of programs forward. So my legacy, I think, would be to feel that I've lit a torch, or I've helped light the torch, and I've helped pass that torch on to others who are taking it forward. I'll be there for a few more years, hopefully, supporting them, encouraging them, but ultimately it will be over to them. And I'd like to feel, my legacy would be I can look back and say, yeah, I had a hand in kindling that greater fire towards more male allyship, more inclusion, and ultimately a better workplace for everybody, and a better society for everybody too.
Robert, and I love that you use this analogy of the torch, because isn't that the important, sort of the most important thing for leaders to do, every leader to do?
Yeah, every leader needs to have a vision of what the world that they want to see. They need to be able to articulate that vision. So that's their torch, as it were, and they need to pass that on to others. So one of the exhortations that I make to the leaders that I coach is, where's your voice on this?
Mm.
You may believe in inclusion, you may believe in the business case, whatever it is, you may be a good inclusive leader personally, but are you getting the message out there as a leader to encourage and inspire others? And I'm not seeing enough leaders doing that. So I'm on a mission to get more leaders talking more openly about this and to have greater impact through whether it's their LinkedIn posts or their speaking at events or whatever it is they're doing. I think leaders have a responsibility to spread the message. And so that would be my exhortation to the leaders that I work with.
Yeah, and we couldn't agree more, Robert, which is completely aligned with She Can, which is why we're doing it. Robert, tell us about your plans and goals. What are your plans and goals for the next years?
Well, it's interesting, Stephanie. Right now, kind of, I'm at a place where I can work pretty much anywhere I'd like to work in the sense of I've got this kind of mobile. I mean, I'm speaking to you from Nice, France, for example, where I'm staying for a couple of months to enjoy living and working here. Obviously, I still go to client meetings in various parts of Europe. It'll be interesting to see what the US brings or doesn't bring, as it were. But for me, I think my sort of vision, if you like, for the next few years for me is where I increasingly encourage others to use their voices so that we increase the collective impact, basically. So I spend a lot of my time supporting others that are doing this work and in that sense, trying to create a greater impact, a greater wave, if you like, of allyship. And I I'm going to be 70 this year, right? Okay. So I could stop, hang up my boots, go on cruises, or whatever. For me, this work is so important and it's so inspiring. The work that I do with others is so inspiring. I'm meeting so many exciting, interesting people that are coming up with new ideas. For me not to be part of that world will be such a shame. So I'm enjoying all of that, while also enjoying the fruits of maybe just taking the foot off the gas pedal a little bit, using some of the leisure time that I have in a nice way. But I think it's about realizing that happiness for me is about continuing to work with others to have an impact. And I think as long as I keep on that road, I think that'll be the sort of vision and the mission that'll work for me over the next 2 to 3, 5, 10 years.
Robert, I'm so inspired by you. I'm so grateful that you came to share your experiences and insights today for She Can. I'm so optimistic when I listen to you about the world that we are all trying to create. I love that it came from a simple question of how can I help? This is the start of everything. And where you make such a big difference to pushing women. There's only 7% of CEOs are women in Europe. You said that. And I'm so excited about all the incredible impact and change you're still going to be a part of going forward. So thank you so much for leading by example in such a powerful way.
Well, Stephanie, thank you very much. It's lovely to have this opportunity to share some of the things I'm doing and some of my thinking. I really admire the work you're doing with She Can. And obviously, I hope to continue to collaborate with you. If I can support you in any way, help you enhance your impact, I'm very happy to do that.
And that you lead with connection and collaboration, which I think is the most important things going forward is connection and collaboration.
Well, absolutely, because I mean, we could look at this as a competitive field where,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, there's other people offering diversity and inclusion or workshops,
Mm.
but that is kind of like limited thinking, I think. There's enough work out there. There's enough opportunity to make change for all of us, basically. So why don't we collaborate, share ideas, work together, increase our impact? So I'm running a number of events coming up in the next few months, which are going to be working with others, doing exactly the work that I do, but working with them as collaborators, not competitors. And I think it's that spirit that will help us increase our impact, have a larger voice, and ultimately see more change.
Robert, thank you for leading with this and for all the work and all the incredible collaborative projects that you take forward.
You're welcome, Stephanie, and thank you very much for talking to me today. It's been a real pleasure.